astronomy is a science.
Yeah.
Why? Because there is a tradition of cumulative accumulation of knowledge. The past has to be actually reconstructed rigorously, and the job is not over. The job is not over at all.
In ancient India, the way the astronomy developed, it was, if I have understood it correctly, that our mathematics actually has developed because of our astronomy. And what I would like you to comment on as an expert, and since you've taught science and technology in ancient Indian history, is that how do you differentiate astronomy and the study of astronomy as a science with astrology? And between astrology, astronomy, and mathematics, the way it has indigenously developed in our country, how different it has been to the Western astronomical developments?
Well, even in India, it's very clear. This is how we actually teach our own class, undergraduate class, about ancient astronomy, that astronomy is a science.
Yeah.
Why? Because there is a tradition of cumulative accumulation of knowledge. If you look at the earliest Vedang Jyotish, they say it was probably written in the pre-state era, but that's difficult to believe because writing really comes into eminence when cities get going. But all the astronomers and their texts follow on from the urbanization, particularly the second urbanization or the Mauryan period onwards. Now, the purpose of astronomy and why it was so important, which explains the textual tradition, is that if you can predict the weather, your harvest will be better. If you can predict the weather, your seafaring will be better. And your overland travel for trade again through Uttar Path and Dakshin Path and so on also has a climatic element, i.e. it should be in your favor. So the job of astronomy was to actually make the weather predictable so that these important economically driven operations can be sort of actualized without much hindrance. So that is a science because it involves observation of planetary movements and correlation with changes in various things, in vegetation, in weather and so on, but with a functional aim to actually keep the production optimal. But in comparison, astrology is more of a hobby, I mean, for those who would participate in it. And I've had the benefit of listening to 3 lectures by Professor Jayant Vishnu Narlikar, our astronomer royal, and I'm influenced that he also thinks, or he sort of shared his view that he does not think that astrology has a quote-unquote scientific basis as such.
What about mathematics as correlated to astronomy?
Well, mathematics is entirely scientific. Nothing could be done. Cities can't be planned, cities can't be built, boats can't be planned, iron can't be the foundries of iron or metals or measurement. Yeah,
it's all.
So certain mathematical functions are cognitively inherited by humans as other animals in terms of measurement of distances and so on. These are inbuilt processes of the brain, but externalizing it through symbols, numbers come with the scripts. So the foundation of mathematics too is connected with urbanization, the formal mathematics in which the long textual tradition.
Professor Pratap, please tell me the way astronomy and mathematics developed in India, how different it was from the way it developed in the West, or even in areas which we say Arabic, so to speak.
Well, as I said, it seems to have a place in the statecraft, and it has a very functional application that with better mathematics you can build better structures and so on. So, I'm not an expert in the history of mathematics, but as a historian, I would say that most of our early knowledge traditions were actually sort of connected with the well-being of the individual or the well-being of society and the state.
So you've been teaching for a very long time things to do with science and technology in ancient Indian times. Now, what exactly are the areas which you tended to emphasize upon while teaching the students, and why, and what is their relevance, what you've taught, with the current times?
Well, in our university curricula, we have to first try to convince the student through certain syllogisms or arguments that there is actually science there in the ancient world. I remember I wrote a small article once and sent it off to a journal, and the editor wrote back a very interesting note saying, are you really certain that there was science in ancient India? So I was very surprised, because it was a very enlightened journal and a very enlightened editor. So I thought to myself that the world is willing to concede that, there was science, and the Needham's volume, 26 volumes on science and civilization in China got written because Needham was a philosopher of science who was interested in Chinese history. But certainly in India too, we have an enormous corpus of work on Lokayat, Nyaya and Vaisheshik, and the early logical systems, early rationalism, and more significant manifestations of science, such as through the volumes edited under the editorship of D.P. Chattopadhyay, who was a student of Karl Popper, Sir Karl Popper, and he was, a president of the Philosophical Society of India, which also looked into history of science. In 1970s, the Indian National Science Academy over here, just down the road, I suppose, from your wonderful offices, they produced a concise history of Indian science, which looked into physics and chemistry and engineering, and more importantly, they compiled a very long list of technical manuscripts from amongst a vast literary hoard that descends and is stored in places like Indira Gandhi National Center of the Arts. So, Shilpa Shastras, for instance, which deal with architecture, there are so many of them. There's not just one. The Sulba Sutra, which
Sulba Sutra, yeah.
So, Indian National Science Academy is already a repository. They run 3 very prestigious journals called Indian Journal of History of Science. One deals with ancient, in which ancient texts dealing with astronomy or mathematics or chemistry, Rasaratnakar or Rasaratna Samuchay and so on, they are actually subjects of serious research which is funded by the government, and for understanding how state and science related. But if you want a personal observation, I have one to offer from astronomy, that there is a text from 14th century which is called Surya Siddhant. And indigenous shipping went up to 14th century until the Portuguese and the others appeared and competed us out. So the Surya Siddhant, if you look at the text, it says text on astronomy, and it has it starts with a mythical narration at the beginning that there was a sort of demon who wanted to who a great disciple of Shiva, and wanted to learn the system of the planets. So the demon started praying, and Surya came down and said, what do you want? So he said, I want to understand the system of the planets. So the sun god actually deputed minor god to then explain it to him. And the author of this book, Siddhant, Surya Siddhant, actually says that this is, epiphany, is the god who's revealing the science. And very interesting reading. And at the end, the story wraps itself saying that, and this is how the science of the system of planets was started. It was a divine event, which can be explained in hundreds of ways. It may have been the sugar coating over a bitter pill. In folk knowledge, the Agadia have made iron, produced iron from the ore without having any texts to study, through practical experience. So that philosophers of science say is the Desi stream of science in India. And then the city-based thinking about science, which ended up as written text, is called the Margi text. So you have both traditions over here. The intermediate technology, if you please, which is non-textual, and then
very interesting
textual.
So this Surya Siddhant this text of which you tell us the story, the story is told. It is interesting, but when you interpret the story, you find that it is very scientific. Is that what you're saying?
It's only science.
It's only science.
It's only science inside. It describes
in a very
eclipses
interesting,
and planetary movement. Yeah.
Okay. So, sir, coming to the end of our conversation, and I must say that we've had a very fruitful and a very in-depth and yet very interesting last 1 hour with you, sir. Before we wrap this session up, what do you have to say in terms of the ancient Indian wisdom and the reservoir that still exists and has not yet been destroyed? A lot of it has been destroyed, but which is still there, and we draw something from there for our current times. Is that a good way of going about it? Is that a way one should now think in terms which is something which is more Indian, more Bharatiya, more indigenous to us? And since it is indigenous to us, it will be far more suitable because it is part of the same environment, it is part of the same cultural ethos, cultural milieu. Do you think that lessons drawn would be far better than the lessons which we usually tend to draw from Western sources?
So, well, I think any historian would say that the past is over and everything that happened in the past is not history. History is an exercise, it's a discipline in reconstructing selectively what happened in the past, following certain rules of evidence, of valid evidence and corroboration and genuine sources from ungenuine sources and so on. So history is a process of selective recreation of the past. History is open to multiple interpretations. There can be an inspired text that looks at the history of religion or music, or there can be a very empirical text empirical history that looks at the origin of astronomy, for instance, or mathematics or whatever. So
agriculture,
health. Indeed. And there are many texts on ancient agriculture, as there are living examples of some of those earlier technologies and so on. So the past has to be accessed. It is not out there, it is over here in the present. The past that we think is out there is actually all in the present. But what it suggests and what the traditional wisdom is actually to be figured out by those who would like to do so. So the historical exercise, minus the historical exercise, no history will happen. There will be only impressions of what they were in the past, which may not be very empirical. So in fact, your line of thinking is very correct, that the past has to be actually reconstructed rigorously, and the job is not over. The job is not over at all.
Thank you, Professor Pratap. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a very absorbing, perhaps 1 hour conversation with Professor Ajay Pratap. This is first episode of Bharat Ki Soch Foundation, where we've tried to sort of paint a very broad canvas for ourselves. And then now we are going to actually delve in and give depth to our further conversations, be it the pillar of governance or economy or national security or health, environment. And as we go further, by and by, we'll bring in more personalities, more experts for us to benefit from, and how our ancient wisdom relates directly to the challenges we face in the contemporary times. So this podcast of ours, my humble request to you is that please do subscribe to it, please like it, please share it, and please make it as popular as possible. Do get back to us with your comments, good, bad, and we will try and improve. Thank you very much. Namaskar.